Resuming debate, the honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise in this debate today. It is unfortunate that we did not have such a debate before our current military deployment to Iraq back in September. The question in today's debate is not whether Canada should do something about ISIL. We should, and our response should be serious and significant. The question is, what should Canada do? How can we be most helpful? Not just in the short run, but in defeating ISIL over the long term. I want to make, before I start, I'm sharing my time with the member from St. John's East. I want to make one thing very clear. We do not need to shoot missiles or drop bombs in order to take this threat seriously. Over 60 countries are helping to defeat ISIL, and the vast majority are not taking part in airstrikes. The Minister of Foreign Affairs has referred to how Italy and Germany support the coalition. They do, and so does the NDP. But like the NDP, governments in Italy and Germany have judged that they can best help through logistics, weapons, training, and humanitarian support. So have conservatives and social democratic governments in Norway, South Korea, Japan, Sweden, Switzerland, New Zealand, Ireland, Spain, Finland, Greece, Poland, and dozens of other countries. ISIL has perpetrated appalling crimes, including mass killings, sexual violence, forced displacement, and destruction of holy sites. More than 20 million Iraqis have been affected. 2 million people have been displaced from their homes. More than 5 million people are now in urgent need of humanitarian assistance right now. The violence ISIL perpetrates is entirely unjustifiable and entirely contrary to Islam. The only ideology it supports is the ideology of hate. The crisis in Iraq also seriously jeopardizes regional peace and stability. The flow of internally displaced people and refugees due to ISIL is threatening the ability of Iraq and its neighbors to secure their borders and govern effectively. The NDP has been clear that Canada has an important role to play in contributing to the international response to this crisis. In fact, in June, I asked the government in the House to help refugees fleeing ISIL. In July, we issued a statement calling on the government to work with our allies to support the Iraqi authorities in building responsible democratic governance in Iraq as a counter to ISIL. My recent visit to Iraq with the Minister of Foreign Affairs reinforced my conviction that action is needed. I heard firsthand what the Iraqi and Kurdish authorities are asking for from Canada, and nobody ever asked for fighter jets. That was true in 2007 when I visited Iraq for the first time, and it was true again this year. In 2007, I went to Iraq to participate in a conference on governance with members of parliament from all major groups, Sunni, Shia, and Kurd. I shared our experience, the Canadian experience, of federalism and inclusion. On October 14th and 15th in 2009, I hosted a conference on Iraq right here in Ottawa with the Stimson Centre and the Centre for International Governance and Innovation on governance and the impact of conflict on minorities in Iraq. We cited at that time the need for more inclusion from the government in Baghdad and the need for protection of minorities. That was then, and what I heard again on the ground a month ago is similar. We need to do more as a country. But instead of following through on their commitment to increase humanitarian and governance assistance to Iraq, the government went looking for military action. The government is now sending more and more Canadian men and women into harm's way in Iraq without a clear plan for going in and with no plan at all for coming out. Last week, it was 69 troops. This week, it's 669 troops. Like many Canadians, New Democrats are very concerned about the deployment of Canadian troops to Iraq on a combat mission that is ill-defined to the point of being irresponsible. Far too many questions about this mission remain entirely unanswered. Who will be commanding this mission? Where will our troops be located? What will be the process for expanding the mission? Will there be another debate and vote in Parliament? The motion we are debating today is ill-defined and ill-conceived. It offers no plan and no exit strategy. Shockingly, there are no new humanitarian commitments, albeit we did hear one today, which is good news. Just as shockingly, there was no territorial limits on operations. Nearly every other member of the coalition has explicitly ruled out airstrikes in Syria. The Prime Minister explicitly ruled them in. This is unfortunate to say the least. The Prime Minister explicitly ruled them in if requested by the brutal regime of Bashar al-Assad, and in the motion that we are debating today opens that door to airstrikes there and anywhere for that matter. There are also no restrictions on who could be included in the category of, quote, terrorists allied with ISIL. The motion allows for the government to go far beyond Iraq and far beyond ISIL. There are very few details in the motion on our deployment of, quote, military assets. Could these go beyond the 9 planes and 600 troops currently committed? We just don't know. And there is no requirement for Parliament to be consulted during or after the 6-month term if the mission is expanded or extended. Canadians are rightly uncomfortable with this mission. It is ill-defined and ill-conceived. Canadians are concerned that the government has no idea where hundreds of troops will be based or when they might even get there. Canadians are concerned that the government is now passing off responsibility for Canada's response to Canadian forces. Our soldiers will do as ordered. That is their job. But this war is the government's decision, and it is their job to take responsibility for that. Canadians are also concerned about the government's willingness to support Bashar al-Assad's dictatorship in Syria and the uncertainty of what we might leave behind in Iraq. And Canadians are concerned about the Conservative government's record of failing to give straight answers to important questions about our military involvement. That's why we have not only opposed the government's wrong-headed war, we also have proposed smart, responsible, and genuinely Canadian alternatives while demanding transparency and holding the government to account. We have asked the government to do 4 concrete things: support the construction of refugee camps, help victims of sexual violence, assist in protecting ethnic and religious communities, and encourage international prosecutions of war crimes. When I made these requests directly to the Minister of Foreign Affairs at committee, he said yes, 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 yes. But we are still waiting for specific and concrete actions on all these fronts. Canada has also an important role to play in encouraging responsible governance in Iraq through collaborative capacity building projects. We've been asking the government to act in these areas for months. Our call has been both pragmatic and principled, motivated by our common commitment to global security and basic human dignity. The mission we are debating today is simply not the best that Canada can do and has to offer. When I was in Iraq last month, I visited a refugee camp. For a few minutes, I walked away from the group of dignitaries and aid workers to look around. I came across a group of small children playing on the dirty ground. Like millions of other children, women, and men in Iraq, they are in desperate need. How can we best help these children, is the question I ask. How can we best help them to not only survive, but to grow up and thrive and lead in a peaceful and prosperous Iraq? This is a debate not just about what we do in Iraq, but what we do as a country. Canadians deserve a Canadian foreign policy that plays to Canadian strengths while representing our interests and our values. And we are most effective on the international stage, Mr. Speaker, when we exploit our comparative advantages in areas like security logistics, nation building, and humanitarian support. Mr. Speaker, the children I met in Iraq need our help. We should be smart in how we deliver.
Questions and comments? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for sharing his perspective in this place. Perspective obviously very different from the government's perspective. But I do have this question because I think that when we look at the history of Canadian involvement in situations that require a coordinated effort from the world, Canadians have been able to do things on a multitasking basis, if you want to use the modern term. They have been able to provide nation-building support, provide humanitarian support, provide the kind of advice that is important on the ground. These things we can do, but at the same time, this situation, as the Honourable Minister has pointed out, is beyond that. Now we are at a point, at a tipping point, perhaps different from where you were visiting there in 2009 and 2010. So the question is, why can't we do both? Why can't we answer the call to be there with our forces in the air and do the things that you want to do as well?
Just remind all honourable members to direct their comments to the chair rather than to their colleagues. The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
A fair question, Mr. Speaker, and here's a very straightforward answer. We should be doing what we were asked to do over a month ago. While the government has been, frankly, dithering on what to do and looking for a military mission, we could have already been saving lives, which was what the Minister of Foreign Affairs and I were asked to do, as well as my friend from the Liberal Party. There was not one ask on the ground from the President of Iraq, from the President of the Regional Government of Kurdistan, from their Foreign Affairs Minister, from the UNHCR. No one asked us to do airstrikes. They asked us to save lives. And while the government, be another 3 weeks, I guess, before we actually have our strike force in theater, while that is happening, and while we've been waiting to hear from the government their plan, we could have already been on the ground saving lives. That's the Canadian way. That's what we should have been doing.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague from Ottawa Centre. I think it's important to stress how he began this, that no one in this place thinks we should do nothing. Speaking for myself, I'm horrified that we appear to be making the assumption that airstrikes will constitute a something which does more good than harm. There's, at this point, there are quite strong voices from such people as our former expert foreign affairs, Bob Fowler, that this could very well do more harm than good. I want to ask my honourable friend if he would agree with me that, if we could agree, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask my honourable friend, if we were to go to the United Nations and ask if a peacekeeping force could be put together with Canadian leadership to provide security for refugee camps and aid workers, would he think that was a reasonable proposal?
The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Well, I think, Canada can provide peace and security with the appropriate UN resolutions. I don't think we're there yet. I think, frankly, that what we need to do is protect the people who have escaped. But let me just add something. I'm a little concerned in this debate that there is this kind of hierarchy of moral outrage, as if the louder you are, then the more outraged you are with ISIL. Mr. Speaker, moral outrage isn't a strategy to deal with ISIL. Right. It's just a reaction, albeit to something very horrific. But, I've been after this government for many years since I've been in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and they can't even see fit to support a bill that will cut off funds to these horrific militia groups. So, spare me, please, the moral outrage and tell me what you're going to do effectively.
Question et commentaire à l'honorable député de Longueuil, Pierre Boucher.
Merci, M. le Président. J'aimerais féliciter mon collègue pour son discours très éclairant, très compétent, très articulé et qui est tout à fait à l'image de la maîtrise de ces dossiers-là que notre équipe au NPD, on a ici. Et bien évidemment, ces dernières expériences qui nous permettent de croire qu'évidemment, il a vu, de ses yeux vus, les besoins des gens là-bas. Et j'aimerais donc m'assurer ici, dans les commentaires que j'entends ici, souvent on évoque cette espèce d'élan international, d'efforts groupés, et j'ai bien compris ici que le gouvernement cherche de temps à autre à évoquer qu'il y a comme une résolution de l'ONU, et j'aimerais qu'on précise bien qu'il n'y a pas de telle résolution émanant d'un organisme de coordination internationale comme celui-là.
The honourable member for Ottawa Centre, short answer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank my colleague for a very good question. The UN Security Council resolution was very clear. To help fight against ISIL, we should do everything as respective member states to deal with the foreign fighters who are being recruited. To help the people of Iraq defend their borders, we support that. But of course, the main issue is for us is do the humanitarian support we're asked to do. He asked me what those kids asked us for on the ground, what the humanitarian UNHCR people asked for, and the government of Iraq and Kurdistan, all the same thing, including our ambassador, humanitarian support, humanitarian support, humanitarian support.